After helping over 18 clients find leases, especially luxury leases ranging anywhere from $19,000 a month in Crystal Cove to essentially one that I just wrapped up to $9,500 in Corona de Mar, there's a few things that I really wanted to highlight when it comes to leasing luxury properties, which is also applicable for anyone who's looking to lease a residential property in the state of California, specifically in Orange County. To summarize the process start to finish, you're gonna have a TRBC, it's a written agreement with an agent that you're working with to actually go and show properties, because if your agent doesn't have that, they're subject to a $2,700 fine. And there's some agents skipping that step, and they shouldn't be. So they're gonna show properties with their agent, you're gonna find the perfect property, your agent is gonna submit a formal written offer with the proper documentation, with your requested terms, and essentially a completed application through RentSpree. So RentSpree is a third-party platform. This is a way for the landlord to see a credit score, also a criminal background history. It is a soft credit pull, not a hard credit pull. And for the most part, every single landlord and agent is using RentSpree now, at least in this area. But keep in mind that there could be some agents or landlords that do not use RentSpree, so it is case by case. But essentially it's about 40 bucks. And if for whatever reason you apply to a property, pay the money to apply for the RentSpree, and that property doesn't work out within that 30-day window, I've been able to reuse that RentSpree report. So essentially that is something to keep in mind. Once approved, they're going to send over the lease for review and essentially for signatures, but we're going to review that bad boy in depth, make sure everything is correct, and make sure any request that they approved is in writing as an addendum, making sure that everything is good to go there. Once that's signed, we'll probably sign it via DocuSign or AuthentiSign, either of those two. Then you're going to get the information to wire over the funds for the security deposit and the first month rent, or whatever was agreed upon. We'll then go and complete a move-in inspection about a day or two before you actually move into the place. And essentially this is going to be when we take the photos. We're gonna give you the keys the day of the lease and the home is yours. But what documents do you actually need? And essentially my recommendation is, especially if you wanna act fast, which from experience, you may not think you wanna act fast until you fall in love with the property and there's already a competition going on for the property. So to be prepared, because it's always better to stay ready than to get ready, right? Essentially, these are the following documentation items that you can send over to your agent, so that way when it comes to, hey, I wanna pull the trigger on this property, the process is already gonna be expedited because we took care of these steps beforehand. That's gonna be a government issued driver's license, essentially any photos of the pets, or ESA or ADA documentation if applicable. Recent pay stubs, ideally 2 to 3 months. Also bank statements, make sure there are no account numbers showing on that, but you do wanna make sure your name is showing on those documents. Or also proof of funds would be efficient too, especially if you're self-employed. And then at the same time, if you're able to send me over a description as far as what you guys do for a living, and a little bit about yourselves. We can't send any love letters due to ADA fair housing discrimination laws, but at the same time, a landlord is vetting clients, so they want to see essentially what they do and a little bit about them. So it allows me to really build reports and hype you guys up as a tenant, so that way the landlord has a clear understanding to who you guys are and essentially what you guys do for a living. Honestly, it might work for some people, but my recommendation is to never apply on Zillow or Redfin or any site like that. And the reason behind it is because a good agent is checking that. I check it constantly, but even though I'm younger and tech savvy, I'm telling you that there are so many agents that have no idea that leads and applications are coming in on Zillow, especially if they aren't paying for these platforms, because these platforms, they're a business, right? So you want to make sure that you submit a formal professional application, especially through a agent who has a relationship or could build a relationship with the listing agent to ensure your offer is getting in front of the landlord and is presented properly. And a Zillow application is not going to do that. Plus, you could potentially spend some fees that are just not necessary. So don't do it, skip it. In luxury leases, or any lease for that matter, it's not guaranteed, but everything is negotiable. In luxury leases specifically, I mean, you have a lot of private owners. A lot of them, essentially, they're not in a situation where they need the cash. A lot of these are assets that they are holding for long term. So again, every situation is completely different. Some will agree to request, some won't. It all comes down to how clean and essentially professional the offer is written, and also how reasonable the landlords are, because there's been some very accommodating landlords because they understand they have a great tenant who I'm bringing them, who's going to be a tenant for multiple years, which is ideal. They're going to take better care of the place, and essentially there's a great relationship. Not so much that they are mingling all the time and bothering each other, but essentially it's just a good landlord-tenant relationship, which is how it should be. I've also dealt with landlords who nickel and dime everything, and just essentially they do not accommodate. And especially in luxury markets, these luxury tenants, they want to ensure that their requests are somewhat accommodated, at least having a win-win situation, not essentially I give you everything and I get nothing in return. Besides price, there's other aspects that you could actually negotiate. You could request credits for upgrades like EV chargers or even alarm systems. Again, landlords don't need to pay for this, so it's not a guarantee they're going to accept this, but at the same time, they could. If the place is furnished, you could essentially ask for some items to be removed and stored, but keep in mind that a landlord probably is not going to pay for a storage unit. They're probably going to put it somewhere in the garage or allow the tenant to pay for a storage unit. Unless the landlord already has a storage unit or an offsite place where they could store everything without additional cost, I wouldn't bank on them taking on an additional cost to store items such as furniture in the place of a rental property that they have furnished. One thing that I have actually done, and I don't recommend locking yourself up for a 2 to 3 year lease unless you absolutely know that you love the place, you know for sure you're going to stay there long term, and you know that you have a landlord who is actually a good landlord, not a pain to deal with. Now, technically speaking, every year a landlord has the ability to increase the rent, even if they fall under AB 1482, which I'll get to in a second. With that being said, if you know you're going to be there for 2 or 3 years, if you're able to lock up a 2-year lease at the same price, you could technically save yourself some money. So that's one way to negotiate. Another way to do that, if you don't want to tie yourself up to a 2-year lease, is that you could propose something like, let's say the rent is $9,000. You could say, hey, $9,000 a month for the first year, 5% increase on year number 2, and a 5% increase and an additional 5% increase on year number 3. Now, the reason why you would do that is because essentially they could raise it more than 5% on year 2 and year 3. So that's a way to control how much the landlord is actually going to raise the rent. And at the same time, now the landlord also knows that they have a long-term tenant, which is great. It's a win-win. So that is one way to also get creative with negotiating. So especially with luxury leases, I've been able to negotiate for my tenant's behalf some pretty creative requests on terms, which have turned out to be pretty favorable for both parties. One of the biggest questions is always who pays what with utilities, and in most cases, now again, everything is negotiable, but in most cases, you're gonna pay for the electricity, the water, the gas, the trash, and of course, the internet. But the landlord is gonna cover the pool and the gardener and essentially pest control, but always confirm this is in writing, which is important why you have an agent actually review this to make sure that the lease agreement before you sign it states clearly who is paying for what, especially for pool, gardening, and pest control. Obviously, the utilities, same exact thing. In addition to who pays what, when it comes to concessions, which is commissions, and so essentially if you're confused about that, essentially if you're on the listing side, seller side, it's a commission. If you're on the buyer or tenant side, it's a concession. So I've been able to have landlords cover the concession that I'm requesting. So that's one of the reasons why you want an agent who could actually negotiate to get themselves paid by the landlord, which in most cases, landlords are still offering concessions to agents that are working with tenants, which is fantastic, which means that a tenant doesn't need to pay out of pocket to work with a great agent. In some cases, I guess potentially that is going to be a situation where if you fall in love with the property, the landlord is refusing, that is going to be a bridge that's going to have to be crossed. But in most cases, that's just not going to be the situation, and a good agent's going to be able to identify that before it's a problem, communicating it early on, so that way you could essentially find a solution to that situation. Now, California has multiple tenant protection laws, one of them being AB 1482, which limits rent increase and also applies a just cause for evictions. But here's the key. Most single-family homes, especially luxury new homes, are going to be exempt from AB 1482. Now, with that said, landlords, and most don't, they need to provide a written disclosure stating that they are exempt from AB 1482. And speaking of tenant protection laws, you might have heard of AB 12, which is essentially a security deposit cap, which really means that a landlord can only require 1 month of security deposit, not 2. But there are some exemptions to note. I'm gonna read it off directly. So, if an individual, not a corporation or REIT or a family trust LLC of individuals owns it, they are exempt, which means they could charge up to 2 months rent. Or if an individual owns no more than 2 properties and no more than 4 total units across all properties are also exempt, which means any of those 2 groups would be able to charge up to 2 months rent. Now, a landlord who is not exempt can only charge up to 1 month rent for a security deposit, as mentioned. Now, here's an interesting thing though. If someone is exempt from the AB 12 and they can legally charge 2 months rent of security deposit, if a tenant is a military service member, that individual, the landlord, cannot charge 2 months. They must comply with AB 12. You might have heard that you can now boost your credit through renting, through actually reporting your monthly rent payments to a credit bureau, which is, yes, something that you could request your landlord to do. People do ask why renter's insurance is required. Well, 2 aspects. 1, a landlord's coverage for insurance is going to cover the building, not your personal belongings. So renter's insurance is going to cover your personal belongings. In addition to that, it does provide the landlord some protection, which by default would put some responsibilities and cover it under the renter's insurance, not necessarily putting any risk on the tenant per se, but essentially the insurance policy holds a better umbrella for some situations than it would for a landlord, exposing them to more risk. So essentially they require it, especially in luxury properties, to mitigate those risks. Leasing luxury properties in California, especially in Orange County, is essentially an art, and it does take time. There's a lot of negotiations that go behind it, especially when you're representing tenants and they want to make sure that everything is done correctly, as they should, because it's an experience. But you do have landlords who are amazing. They're accommodating. They know that they're going to get a great tenant and they want to keep them for long term. They want to make them happy. But at the same time, I do understand that a landlord wants to maximize profits and returns, because that's my goal when I represent landlords. It's just the aspect of you want it to be a win-win situation. So hopefully this answered some of your questions. If you have specific lease questions, I am here to help. Contact me at 949-405-4455. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more real estate content.